So, are we going to cover free will while we're here? That's one thing we haven't gone into.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean,
Why don't you open
Yeah, open it up, Sean.
Is
Get in
this
there.
conversation? Do we have free will in this whole conversation, or is this all just a part of the plan? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we do have free will. But then again, I don't know if it really matters if we do or don't. I don't know if it would change our life. Or it shouldn't change the way you live your life. It's like the Marcus Aurelius quote, like, it doesn't matter if there's a God or if there isn't. You still be a good person. You still have morals. You still live your life to that standard. And, yeah, if there's a God or if there isn't, they're still going to respect you and...
Or not.
Or not, yeah.
Fuck them. I don't know. You go, Dwight.
I tend to think that there isn't free will. I don't think there's no scientific evidence that there's free will, right? Like the only thing that's in our heads is molecules, and we don't know of anything that can influence those other than the stuff that we know about. And so there's nothing that says that there should be free will that we know of yet. Which obviously doesn't mean that there isn't. It just means that I'm skeptical. You know, it's kind of in the same light that I see some sort of supernatural being, right? I don't think there's any evidence
what is free will to you? What does the idea of free will mean to you?
That we can make decisions based on something aside from just the chemical reactions in our brain. So I tend to think of it in terms of like if we had a powerful enough supercomputer and we knew enough about the universe and like everything that we could put in all these variables and we could model the universe perfectly, that we could then predict what every person is going to do. I think if we had a crazy, absurdly powerful supercomputer and we knew all these variables, that we could do that. So to me, what that says is that there's nothing outside of the chemical interactions in your brain that's going to determine what's going to happen. So like me saying, oh, I'm going to get up and go get a glass of water is not like something in me deciding to do that. It's that was going to happen anyway, and based on the environmental impacts and everything that's happened before in my life and everything that's happening now right here. So it's not necessarily that there's like some sort of decision being made per se. It's more just that it was going to happen. And so that's sort of my scientific viewpoint on whether or not there's free will. But I do psychologically still think of myself as being able to make decisions, because I think it would be hugely damaging for me to not think that, and to think that like I can't actually do anything. Like,
so you believe that there isn't, but then you kind of believe, but you act as if there is.
Correct. Because like I'm not so arrogant as to assume that I'm right. Like I don't know if there is or isn't, but what I do know is that if I were to believe that there wasn't and act as if there wasn't, then it might damage the way that I live my life. And so I'm going to pretend that there is, even though I don't necessarily believe that there is, because that makes me happier.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. For sure. I mean, I definitely do believe in free will, even though I understand all of those arguments. And I could be completely wrong, but the way I see the universe taking into account the idea of free will is that we could have predicted everything, like you said, from the Big Bang up till the point where you have, sentience. And at that point, there's new variables.
That's just for the podcast is determinism.
Oh, that's a thing? Determinism?
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm a determinist. But anyway, yeah.
But isn't it...
No, it continues. Like, no, not up until a certain point.
Yeah,
determinism is you can determine.
So you're a determinist until humans come about, or until something sentient.
Which is really interesting. It's an interesting caveat you got there, Dan.
Yeah.
That's what I thought for a long time. Is that a thing that you know
that's
of?
his argument for free will, is that everything is deterministic until humans or some sentience comes about,
right.
At which point we can no longer predict because of this otherworldly thing of free will.
And I don't think it's otherworldly. I think it's a construct that within it grants the capacity for self-determination.
See, that's
so
what
it's
I
like
believe
it has these chemical things going on, but there's some core reasoning entity in the middle of that is a part and parcel of that construct. I don't think it's supernatural in any way, but that it can select between these different vying forces.
Totally. That's
And
known as the Cartesian theater. So that's the idea that there is something that is watching everything occur, like that is separate from it, and then you're just like having all of the determinism happening, but then you can like poke on it. You get to like poke.
That's
something.
a lot closer to what I think, for sure. And to get more into the minutia of it, I tend to think that most people, most of the time, are not exerting their free will. That they respond directly to these stimuli, just like you're saying. But that that if one tries hard enough and applies oneself to it, you can budget a little. You can choose, no, I don't want to do what I was gonna do. I want to shake it up and do this thing instead. And so, yeah, and it gets more into like also, you know, when human beings are in states of necessity, when they're compelled by their circumstances to do things, and they don't have the luxury and the security to exert their free will, then I don't think they have free will in those moments, because they're just responding to stimuli. So I think we tend to be like, you know, maybe 90-something% non-free and a little bit free.
Where would you say that thing is like located, and what do you think it is?
I don't know.
Okay.
To either of those questions. I think it is somehow created as a byproduct of the total composition of what we are, and I don't know.
So one of the ideas is
consciousness itself is incredibly we
don't
know about the stomach brain now and how that's a thing, and like there's all kinds
even
of
with
shit.
that we still don't
So I don't know. This is largely just my own introspection, you know, and intuitive view of things.
No, that's good. I mean, a lot of people, yeah, like that's pretty like close to a lot of the stuff that's like talked about nowadays.
You should talk about what you think too.
Yeah, I'd totally be down. The one thing that gets difficult though with that, Dan, is like, okay, so first it's like there's the idea that consciousness would be an epiphenomena of the neurons that are firing in your brain. Okay, so it's like there's like kind of basically the static on top of like the energetic static on top of like the brain tissue, and that is like what consciousness is. And some people advocate for that. And that could be a place for what you're talking about. Because you said it wasn't otherworldly, right?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But again, we can't claim that with surety. I tend not to believe in otherworldly forces generally.
Totally. And it's just...
In my own personal spiritual way, I do. But I don't literally think they exist.
Totally. And those, like, the spiritually way could be argued as, like, mental tools for you to use rather than...
Right.
Because there are, like, we don't want to throw out the theories that would be there is a soul, because that's a place for that. That what you just described is a place for a soul.
See,
like, a soul could be there.
I don't believe in a soul in the way it's talked about in, like, Christianity or anything, though.
Yeah.
But if you want to call, like, a physical phenomena the soul, and say that it's simply something we don't understand yet.
Totally. What about... Okay, but you do think it's a physical phenomenon. So you think that it's working within the materialistic standpoint?
I think so, only because we haven't learned anything other than that, so...
I don't think we have a soul. I think I don't think there's much difference between us and an animal, or any other life, but we do have our critical brain that we can use tools like logic and reasoning to do what we're doing right now, having a conversation, which leads to free will. I think that's why more simple life forms don't, because it literally is just a chemical
Slave to
going
stimuli,
on.
essentially.
Well,
But then that's
Yeah,
the
please.
argument, like, maybe everything going on right now is just chemicals. I mean, it is
Yeah.
just chemicals bouncing off of each other.
But the question is, has it reached a state of complexity where it has
Where we
an
have
autonomous
Yeah.
entity or construct within it
well,
as a
so
product of it?
the way that I think about it is that there's this idea in like cognition research or cognitive research that there's these things called metacognitions. And the idea would be that you have processes, because like a huge thing in cognition research is to imagine the brain as basically like a computer. So the idea would be is that you have processes that are watching other processes. So the idea would be like you're trying to like remember a word, and so you count the amount of times you hear that word every day. that would be like, there's obviously a ton of other functioning that's going on, but the idea of you trying to remember and recall the number of times, that's like a metacognition for something. So for me, that's how I think of free will, is like a space where, I think meditation is like one of the best examples for it, is like where you can watch what's going on at different parts of the brain. So different other different processes. So like your heart beating, or like you breathing, or like that would be like way lower brainstem kind of stuff. Or like you could go to the limbic system, like what am I feeling? What is like going on that way? And then you could also think about what are like a higher kind of like what's on my mind, you know, kind of idea. And there's always that thing about it where it's like, okay, well, you're watching those things, so the thing that's watching it seems to be apart from all of that, a different thing from all of that, because it's the thing watching all of that stuff happening. And a lot of people will, like, for meditation, will keep taking that up and up and up and up, and then that's where they get like to this idea that there may be something that watches everything else.
Right.
But the other idea for that philosophically is there's no end to it. Like, you can keep going up.
Forever.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the way that I think about it functionally is like free will functionally is, because I don't think that there is like this thing where you are free to do whatever the fuck you want. I don't think that's real.
No, and kind of like what I was saying, I think there's like a limited amount of freedom in a largely unfree context.
Totally. So the way that I think about it is, why I say functionally is because we do make decisions and we make choices, and so we have to be able to explain that somehow. Like, the idea that we feel as though we make a choice is something, even though we have proven through neuroscience that there's actually the decision to do the action, the feeling happens after, when it was already done. So it's like when you decide something, quote unquote decide something, when you're like, I decide I'm gonna choose Pepsi, like from earlier, that already happened before you said I'm going to decide it in your head. So the idea, if you think that's the free will part, that I don't think is the free will part. But there is also this idea that you can select your environment for the kind of things that will come into your mind.
Yeah, and that's part of why I think of it in terms of like, we're largely products of our stimuli, and we have kind of an ability to nudge things.
Yeah.
So that idea of like, I'm going to change my environment because I know that's going to change me.
Yeah.
You're making a choice that's going to impact, you know, your future behavior. I mean, even if you couldn't do it without the assistance of the stimuli, to me that indicates there's still something there, you know, outside the stimuli.
But I would say that is predicated on other stimuli.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it could just be, you know, you came across the stimuli of knowing that you're changing your environment would change who you are, unless you change your environment in a way that you were already going to do in those kinds of ways. Like, it gets difficult because, you know, when you're talking about something that watches the other thing, it's like all of that's still up in here. All of that is still constrained by what's going on in our minds or bodies, wherever it may be. And so to say that it has some sort of control or autonomy, I feel is sort of a misnomer. And it's basically, maybe we don't understand it and we're not cognizant of what's actually going on.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that it's not self-determined already. You know, that it's
That's
not
true.
just a bunch of
That's
chemical
true.
reactions that are going on and all of a sudden, oh, I've decided to do this thing.
Yeah.
And it's
However, the fact that you say complexity, that I can 1,000,000,000% agree with. We don't
super
know.
complex for sure.
Yeah, we know barely
Yeah,
anything
no
about
clue.
how neuron firing actually becomes a thought.
Yeah.
We don't. Yeah. But the like we can get regions of a brain that might be for this kind of thing. That's like basically where we're at.
right.
Um,
And again, I think it's really important to think of yourself as having agency over your life. I feel like that's
Well,
such a
statistically, that literally does impact your life,
it's such a
Exactly.
whether you
huge
believe it or not.
exactly.
idea, yeah. And so when that's why I say that I can't defend the premise of free will from a scientific standpoint, but I still believe that I have it because I feel like it's beneficial for me.
And that's why I advocate for a redefining of what free will is. I don't want to get rid of the concept of free will, but I want to make it workable within
See, I
science.
agree, and I actually tie that into some of my political views in the sense of talking about what environmental factors deny one's capacity to exert control over their own life.
Yeah.
I mean, and that again was talked about a lot during the New Deal by FDR. The idea necessitous men are not free men.
Totally. And
You
even
know?
from like so there that's it for a social aspect, but we were just speaking about it in an individual aspect where like speaking about how cognition researchers have like looked at situations where they're trying to obtain material from like a witness.
Yeah.
And like how easily you can like embed false memories or channel someone's thoughts, and literally you can be like this person and show that person like enough to them where they will take that person's face and they will remember that being the person. It's a completely different person. You can insert that memory and they won't know the difference. So there's situations where that can happen too, where you take away the free will of like even recall, even your own memory.
Yeah.
So
I think memory is something we habitually trust far more than it deserves.
Oh, it's incredibly false. Yeah.
It's one of those things that we hold so dear to ourselves and we think of as so infallible in so many instances, and yet it's...
Well, we would have no concept of self without memory.
Mhm.
I mean, it really is the seat of our identity in a lot of
Totally.
ways.
Don't they say all memory is just like every time you remember something, you're just remembering the last time you remembered it? So
Yeah,
the
well, because
copy of it.
The
A
act
copy
of
of a
remembering
copy.
something
Yeah.
is you literally like rewriting the entire occurrence, and so every time you remember something, you're actually like rewriting it and therefore changing that.
Yeah, it's like telephone around a camp. It is.
Yeah.
it's-
yeah, I mean it is really cool like thinking about it from a neuron standpoint too, because it's like literally if you have something that gets triggered, it's basically like you have this line of like 4 different neurons and it will shoot up that line, but those neurons are in a chemical soup, and that chemical soup will be a little bit different because you're in this mood or in this mood or in this mood, or you remembered this thing. And so what happens is your neurons will actually grow differently each time and maybe
Only those
connect
4,
with
though.
another. Yeah, only those 4. In this case, we're looking at a small
Yeah.
system. But they will literally grow differently now. Some won't because they're so freaking embedded, like really deep down. But more of our, like our memory stuff, like the hippocampus is made to do that, and that's really what a huge part of what we use for recall is like taking all of this information and trying to group it up into it so that we can use it for our prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
And that changes all the time. So.
Which is fucking insane. Like to think about, just like for me, one of the kind of the same cognitive dissonance that I have for memory or for free will rather, and how I actually believe it works. It's hard for me to get around that when I'm thinking of things like how memory works or how like the immune system works. Like those things are so fucking insanely complex, and it's just crazy for me to think about how that just evolved and how we can, I could think back to a time, 10 years ago, and I can essentially replay what I think happened and sort of watch it as a movie in my head, and like, that's insane. So just that's kind of an aside, but holy fuck, right?
Yeah.
But existence.
Holy
Life's
fuck,
a
it
trip,
is
boys.
reality.
But I think like one of the reasons why I got really interested in cognition research is because of that idea of like the metacognitions, because I think they're so useful for people, especially when it comes to like moral situations or like trying to change behavior.
Yeah.
Those things are just like so big, and we don't talk about them like at all. We have like the idea, like I see them everywhere. It's like the people who like have the little like sign in their room or quote in their room, like you have a whole wall, right?
Yeah.
So it's like that kind of thing is like they say you should do it, but it's also like how impactful that is just so crazy.
Oh, it's huge for me.
Yeah. To be able to like just see something that reminds you to do that thing is like, it can be
I mean,
crazy.
it changes
It
who
will
I
change.
am.
Exactly.
Literally, it's like things that remind me of who I want to be, and if I'm reading them regularly, I start to change.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, it's very powerful. Did you have anything more you wanted to say on free will?
No, I mean, I think it pretty much sums up. Yeah, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
yeah, you're still gonna.
Well, I think it matters if we're gonna get into where it matters. It's
That's a good
the idea of it mattering is really important when it comes to trying to figure out if someone's guilty of something or not.
And what that means,
interesting.
Yeah.
and what that means, and what you do with the various people that sort of exist outside of society. Because if it's really not their fault, then what do you? The whole idea of punitive, like of just a system designed on punitive measures doesn't make any sense at that point.
That's
Right.
true. Yeah, it would literally do nothing.
No, and I mean, if you think about it from a standpoint of why we do that,
It actually does do nothing.
of why we do that, it's because we feel better that we punish this person for doing this bad thing.
Yeah.
But what do
But
you?
if
There's
we-
the idea of deterrence, but
Well, right, but really,
We know
if we look at the
psychologically
statistics,
that's not
it doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if we want to be intelligent about our our legal system or how we deal with criminals, the thing that makes the most sense is to look at the statistics of how we can integrate those people back into society
yeah,
and make
for
them
sure.
function the way that we've decided
but
is
I
right.
have that view of criminal justice, even having a point of view based on free will, but only because I think people are more defined by their environment most of the time than by their choices.
Mhm.
And I do think there are people who are more in control of their choices than others, again, depending on their circumstances, and that we can make a society more
Oh, totally.
conducive to that.